Hollow Knight Silksong, like its predecessor, is not an easy game. Each segment of it is full of various challenges that the player must overcome in order to advance the story. However, even in the first few days of release, players were saying they thought Silksong was so difficult as to be unfair and hard to enjoy. I wanted to take a closer look at those claims. First of all, the question of whether Silksong is too difficult is hard to definitively answer because what counts as too difficult is subjective. Some people enjoy difficult games, others don't. Aspects of the game that some people struggle with will give others little to no trouble at all. Everyone's different, so it's impossible to create something that will appeal to everyone. Even if some people didn't enjoy the challenge of the game, they can still find fulfillment in other areas such as the game's aesthetic and storytelling. Frustration at a game's difficulty is an entirely valid feeling, however, since games are meant to be fun and engaging. The main issue seems to be that sometimes Silksong's difficulty would prevent players from being able to have any kind of positive experience with the game. In what specific ways is Silksong said to be excessively hard? I briefly touched on this in my first impressions of Silksong video, and I'll go more into detail here. One complaint is the number of the game's enemies and obstacles that deal double damage. Like the first game, certain heavy-hitting attacks and falling objects would understandably injure the player character more than other things that don't hit as hard. What's unique to Silksong is that some attacks and hazards will damage Hornet while also holding her in place so that she takes damage once again. I agree that it seems a bit unfair that being hit by something once can result in taking damage twice in a row, especially since in this case there's no way to avoid the second damage by dodging or any other means. It also seems a bit unrealistic given Hornet's characteristic agility. Some instances of this have been fixed in game updates, however. The sparseness of benches in certain areas of the map is also a worthy point of criticism. Silksong is a bigger game than Hollow Knight by leaps and bounds, yet the number of benches doesn't seem to scale with the vastness of Farloom. Some benches are also hidden or initially inaccessible. The main Sinner's Road bench must be fixed by going through a gauntlet, and the one in Hunter's March is at first a trap, with the switch to disable the trap being hidden. Perhaps the most egregious example is the bile water. Signs point the player towards a bench which turns out to be non-functional, and a working bench is hidden behind a breakable wall in a place that players would not think to look since it requires going into infested water. Verdania has only one bench, and since the rest of the area is inside a memory, dying requires coming all the way back from the entry point. There is a way to instantly return to Bellway stations, most of which have a bench, but this isn't accessible until Act 3. Another cited example of excessive difficulty which I agree with is the gauntlet of enemies preceding Grohl the Great's boss fight. The gauntlet consists of multiple rounds of enemies and takes place over a pool of infested water. If the player kills all the enemies but dies during the fight against Grohl himself, they have to redo the gauntlet from the beginning. I think it would have been entirely fair if the enemies before the boss only had to be fought once, considering the challenge of navigating the bile water and how easy it is to miss the working bench, which is itself still some distance from Bilehaven where the boss fight takes place. The thing is, Team Cherry had legitimate reasons for making Silksong difficult. Hollow Knight was also difficult, so it would only make sense that its sequel would be. It's expected that Silksong players would have played Hollow Knight first and would thus be prepared for a game more difficult than it. Team Cherry very likely wanted people to take their time with Silksong, encouraging players to use the game's abundant resources to craft their own strategies. Since multiple routes are open to the player, if they get stuck somewhere, they can just find a detour and return to something that they couldn't get past later on when they're more equipped. It can also make the game more replayable, motivating players to use knowledge that they didn't have but gained during their first playthrough in additional playthroughs. Some games, including those within the Metroidvania genre, do have features like an easy mode, but implementing such a thing would make development take longer, and Team Cherry themselves agree that Silksong's development took long enough. When creating the first Hollow Knight game, money was a concern, which could be why that game didn't have difficulty settings, and therefore its sequel doesn't either. Even aside from those factors, adding an easy mode is still entirely optional on the developer's part. In the end, no game can ever be perfect, and that includes even truly great ones like Hollow Knight and Silksong. Team Cherry made the game the way it is for a reason, and I trust their intuition on that. Every single person who plays Silksong will have an entirely unique experience with it, and I think that's a positive thing. What you think of the game is up to you alone, and as a community, we can and should agree to disagree on ultimately inconsequential matters. After all, we're here to appreciate these works of art for what they are, and share our passion for them with one another. Anyway, what do you think? Would you say that Silksong is too difficult, whatever that means for you? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I've got plenty more ideas for Silksong videos, so subscribe and click the bell to see them all. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.